Okay, Mendel and his experiments. He experimentally crossed different strains to develop hybrids. So remember, he crossed, let's just say tall with short, pure tall with pure short. He produced all tall plants. These were a hybrid of their parents. Remember, he called these the P1. These were the F1. The reason they were the hybrid is because we had the tall crossed with the short and produced all talls that were this. Genetically, they were a mixture of their parents. Physically, the way they looked tall. They only looked like one parent. So technically, it looked like this parent's traits disappeared. They didn't. They're just hidden right here. And then again, he took those F1 talls, crossed with the F1 talls, which is what he did here. He then crossed the hybrids and analyzed the results. So he took the hybrid, crossed it with another hybrid. It's a hybrid because it's a mixture of its parents. And then he analyzed those results, which he called these results F2. Okay, that's just a quick summary of the last lecture. Again, here's those terms again. Trait, specific characteristics that vary from one individual to another because you got them from your parents. Hybrids, the offspring of crosses between parents with different traits. Tall parent with a short parent, yellow with a green. Genes, chemical factors that determine your traits. They determine who you are. Your genes have that DNA, all those codes, the A's, the C's, the G's, the T's. Allele, the forms of the genes, the different forms. Remember, you could have the tall allele or the short allele. You could have the yellow allele, well, if you're a plant, you did anyway, or the green allele. You have the round allele versus the wrinkled allele. Maybe for humans, you could have the tongue-rolling allele versus the non-tongue-rolling allele. So the allele is just the form of the trait. Which form did you get? Rule of unit factors. Each organism has at least two alleles for each trait. You have to have at least two because you got one from mom and you got one from dad. And maybe you got the same allele. That's fine. But you got at least two. You got one from mom and one from dad. An allele is the different form of the same gene. There are genes out there that have two alleles. There are the simple ones. Mendel got lucky picking peas because he had tall or short, yellow or green, round or smooth, or wrinkled. He got lucky. He had two alleles. If you start looking at humans, we're a lot more complicated than that. Some of our traits have three or more alleles. Think about your hair color. You have the brown allele, the blonde allele, the black allele. Skin color, all kinds of alleles. So we are starting out simple. We're going to look at stuff that has just two. Genes, again, located on chromosomes. They control on how an organism develops. I'm going to go ahead. So we have the gene you got from mom. You got the gene, chromosome. Those are the chromosomes. Within there, you have your, all those DNA. Okay, and maybe it's this chunk right here that's controlling, I don't know, whether you can roll your tongue or not. Same way with this one. You get one from mom, you get one from dad. Those codes in there, codes that are here and those codes that are there, determining the way you look, the way you act, the way you function. So this one whole chromosome, there's only parts and pieces of that DNA that gets read. Those parts and pieces are those genes. Okay, So you're going to hear this many, many times. P1 generation, 2 pure plants were crossed. The 2 original parents were crossed. And I usually just talk about one trait just to make it easy, but we could go through this with all 7 traits of Mendel's peas. So P1, he crossed a pure tall with a pure short. I could do this for the shape, I could do this for the pea color, I could do this for the pod color, and on and on and on. I'm just going to stick with height for simplicity purposes. So he took the pure of one trait, crossed it with the opposite pure trait. He did that. That gave him his F1 generation, which were the hybrids of the parents. They all looked tall, but genetically, they had something from each parent. He then decided to take that F1 generation because he noticed, hey, there was a trait, there was an allele that disappeared. One of the forms disappeared. There was no more shortness. So he wanted to see what would happen if he took the F1 generation and crossed it with itself. So he took the F1 talls and crossed it with the F1 talls. Okay. And from all of that work came some information that made Mendel the father of genetics. Strong heredity traits cover over weak traits. Mendel called the strong traits dominant. Think about a dominant personality. They overpower, just like dominant genes do. Mendel called the weaker traits recessive. A recessive personality is going to seem weak. They kind of hold back. Dominant traits are represented by the capital letters, while recessive traits are represented by the lowercase letters. It really does not matter what letter you use. You can use any letter you want to represent a trait, as long as the capital letter and the small letter are easily distinctive. You would not want to use C's, capital C's and small c's. I can't tell the difference. If you have poor handwriting, stick with letters where the big letter and little letter look different. If I can't tell the difference, you will get them wrong. You will see that I use lots of T's, R's, my Y's, but not everybody's Y's, B's, D's are really good to use. Again, when you're talking about dominant and recessives and you're having to write these letters, pick letters that are distinctive, big letters versus little letters. And you can use the same letter over and over and over again. Okay, the rule of dominance. The trait that is observed in the offspring is the dominant trait. We always use the capital or uppercase letter. The trait that disappears in the offspring is the recessive trait, or the lowercase letter. That's why you need to be using distinctive letters. Vocabulary words, phenotype versus genotype. Phenotype, the way the organism looks. It's physically the way you look. Genotype, it is your genes. We can't see your genes, so we have to use letters to represent. So letters represent genotypes. Physically, the way you look is your phenotype. So tall, short, round are all phenotypes. Pure dominant, pure recessive. Dominant means big, it's what shows up. Recessive is little. Those are the genes, genotype. Two more vocabulary words. Heterozygous versus homozygous. Heterozygous. If the two alleles for the trait are different. You have the tall allele from one parent and the short allele from the other parent. This is a heterozygous genotype. And it's heterozygous because we have one of each letter. We have the dominant versus the recessive, the tall, the short. Genotype because these are the genes of the person. And if we were talking height, this plant would be tall. Homozygous, if the two alleles for the trait are the same. Homo means same. Hetero means different. Hetero, different sized letters. Homo means the same size. Same size, we could have this or that. Homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, heterozygous. Okay, one last quick review of what Mendel did with his peas. And I'm probably just going to stick with height, even though I could use another one of his traits. So we're going to start with the P1 cross. Remember, we're crossing, we're breeding. He took the pure talls with the pure shorts. There's those genotypes and the phenotype sitting there. This gave him his F1 generation. He then did the F1 cross, which gave him his F2 generation. His F2 generation had talls and shorts. So the trait that disappeared at the F1 came back in the F2. It did not literally disappear. It was just hidden. That big T literally covered it up. That dominant gene literally covered it up. It could not be expressed. Review of Mendel. Parental generation were the P1s. This is what he started with. They were pure, parental P, pure. F1 generation was the first set of children. The filial generation, the first set of children. He then had his F2 generation, which was the second set of children, the second filial generation. That's that F, that word I was trying to remember earlier. P1s give you F1s, F1s give you F2s.